integrating into a webinar.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to City Talk as part of the fantastic Massey College City Summit. My, oh my, oh my, I've been watching with great interest people participating with a great level of intellectual rigor and enthusiasm. I just want to shout out to my academic colleagues who were showing great enthusiasm for this topic, which isn't necessarily something that everybody talks about at their coffee tables. But I am here joined by three illustrious folks engaged in these issues on the ground in cities around the world. And this is about what alternative city futures could look like if cities were governed differently and if they had different resources and powers. And so this is a kind of session where we kind of test drive or see how these concepts and principles actually can play out. And we've got three folks joining us who have very particular experience in advocating for local governance in all its different forms. I'm Mary Rowe from the Canadian Urban Institute, and this is a combined session with City Talk, with our City Talk audience across Canada and the US that watch our sessions regularly about issues facing urban life, and also all the folks that are involved in the Massey College Cities Summit, which is going on for 3 days, and which we encourage you to go to the website and sign up for some other sessions if you haven't, because it really is riveting to hear people talking about a topic that in Canada has a lot of sensitivity around the Constitution, also known as the C word. And these folks are really adding some vibrant ways to rethink this and to not make this as overwhelming a topic as it often is seen to be. So we're very appreciative to be partnering with Massey College and with with Maitree and Shirk, who are also supporting this process and this event, and we've been delighted to work with Principal DeRosier and colleagues across the country on the organizing committee who are going to pop in and out of these sessions over the next 3 days. And you're going to see me every day too, because I get to have a gang like this put their minds to it and share with us their expertise each time. So it's an iterative conversation, a live conversation, and it's really designed to raise questions, get us all thinking imaginatively about what the future of governance in our cities could be, and to allow ourselves to ask questions that tend to be shushed away. These are serious topics, and we got three serious folks here joining us. I'm in Toronto today. It's a beautiful sunny day, which we're appreciative of. We're in our interminable lockdown here in Ontario, and so some sunshine is welcome. I know that my colleagues in their jurisdictions also are experiencing varying degrees of lockdowns and curfews. We're all continuing to try to soldier on with what seems to be a relentless challenge that COVID and now the variants are posing, and then government's various attempts to try to contain the virus. And we appreciate always at the outset that there are people working on the front lines, trying to keep people healthy, save lives, and protect us as best we can. So we always acknowledge that. This is also the traditional territory, Toronto, of a number of First Nations, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat peoples, the Mississaugas of the Credit, and the Huron-Wendat. And we have two treaties that we're subject to here. One is the Williams Treaty, and a number of treaties that were signed with Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and then a number of treaties also signed with the multiple Anishinaabe nations. And here in Canada, we have been struggling to come to terms with the legacy of urbanism, which has been excluding. It's often been racist. It's certainly been anti-Black racist, and we are continuing to come to terms with, as we build back better, what will more equitable urban environments look like. And that is part of this conversation, I think, is will new governance approaches make our cities more equitable? Will they make them more just? So that's the context in which we have these folks joining us, and I'm really pleased to have them. Antonella, Rudi, and Jean-Pierre. Jean-Pierre's in Morocco, Rudi's in, I think, Brussels, and Antonella, are you still in Northern Italy? Is that where you, that's where you were when we last spoke, right? So they're at the other end of the day. We're between them and whatever their evening ritual is, so we appreciate them taking time. Details of their biographies are posted in the chat. As anyone knows who comes on City Talks, the chat function is a very important one. Lots of conversations take place there. We encourage you to post questions there and feel free to answer each other's questions. There's a whole parallel universe that goes into the chat, and we appreciate very much the caliber of discourse and the way in which you share that chat as a way to share resources and all that kind of thing. So thank you for that. As you know, we record these sessions, we'll post them after the fact, and we post the chat. So whatever you write, just remember it's there for posterity. So I'm going to just turn to each of our guests and ask them to give us a little snapshot of what they do and what their perspective is, with this in mind, that we're talking about approaches to local governance and what you see as the priorities going forward for a situation like Canada would find itself, where it's starting to reimagine different kinds of arrangements, both fiscal arrangements and decision-making arrangements. What, from your perspective, would you say would be the most pressing set of conditions that you would like us to be thinking based on your experience? So I'm going to go to Antonella first. If you look again on the bio, you'll see that Antonella has a long, I don't want to say long because that implies she's old. I think Antonella is younger than I am, so she's not that old, but she is the Secretary General of ALDA since 1999. So she's been at this for a number of years, and she's all about citizen and resident empowerment, local democracy, and all the different ways in which that's being experienced in Europe. She has subsidiarity in her bones. And Antonella, we're very, very appreciative of you joining us. So why don't I start with you? If you'd unmute yourself, just give people a picture of what your life's work has been and the priorities that you're choosing now. And then after you, I'm going to go to Jean-Pierre. And then after Jean-Pierre, I'm going to go to Rudi. So over to you, Antonella.
Hello, thank you, Mary. Hello, everyone on the other side of the Atlantic. Yeah, I've been working on empowering local communities, Mary, for these last 20 years. So for me, local communities means work with local governments, which are empowered, able to decide on their resource. That's when we come to taxes. Yeah, so on their resources, they have to decide what is good for their community, and they engage with citizens. So for me, communities are both the stakeholders, and they need empowerment, and we need to create instruments which facilitate the dialogue and constructing together. I've been working here in Europe, which is a pretty big concept, but let's say in what we could say the 27 European member states, and then also the Council of Europe member states, and then also over the Mediterranean. I worked a lot also in Eastern Europe and transition post-Soviet Union countries. What I see is that actually this is a sort of universal drive, Mary. I think that facing the challenges also at the global level, we need very strong communities, and whatever happens, they are impacted. And what are the challenges, whether this is global challenges when it comes to pandemics, but it was also environment, when it is also demographic issues and migration issues, the communities have to face the reality. So said that, we need both sides of the communities being empowered, and local governments, they need to be able to decide on their instruments. You know, they have to have choice and instruments, and in order to have instruments, they need to also have a budget. So we are often referring in Europe, and both Rudi and Jean-Pierre know that, we are referring to a charter, which is the European Charter on Local Self-Government, which is mentioning the fact that real local authorities are those who are able to have their own taxation, that they are able to have a choice on their own budget. Because if it comes only from the state, this is not real. So you need to be able to have your own taxation. I made a research, and I I think I can give, for instance, an evidence that subsidiarity, which is also the topic of our conversation today, is the key issue. It's a constitutional principle in Italy, for instance. Subsidiarity is mentioned as such in the Italian constitution. So first you start with local authorities, and then if it's not solved, it goes further. But the starting point for subsidiarity in the Italian constitution is there. In terms of taxation, of course, it's an immense issue. It creates the possibility of choice for local authorities, and it creates a possibility for citizens to have a counterpart. For instance, in French municipalities, where we have our headquarters is based in Strasbourg. Strasbourg has, for instance, 30% more, 35% from their own resources, plus with taxes, various taxes, plus they have the revenues also of instrumental companies, which are energy, waste management, and so on. So more than half of the budget of a big city of France depends from their own revenues. And that completely changed the dialogue, the elements of the discussion. So I think that I will conclude, because I'm, of course, fascinated by what Jean-Pierre is going to say, and from his experience, which is broader than mine, and from another enormous challenge of the world, which is Africa, but and Rudi, of course, from the OGP experience. But what I would say is that now more than ever, these two elements of civil society and local authorities combined together with dialogue and empowerment are certainly a solution for the global crisis that we are facing. And what I wanted to tell you, because you mentioned that in Canada you are talking constitutional reforms, I think that to confirm that in many countries of Europe where I'm working, mainly, this is a constitutional point, and that makes a big difference.
Thanks, Antonella. I'm going to come back to some of the concepts you talked there about instruments of dialogue, this idea that local governments need to choose their instruments and have the resources to choose those instruments. And I think this is something we've seen in Canadian cities during COVID, is that municipal governments, local governments have been on the front lines. They've had to improvise and do all sorts of things in a crisis that they didn't have the resources to do, and they probably didn't have the jurisdiction to do in certain instances, and they just had to do what was required. And I think that the question is, how do we turn that into some kind of enduring structural change that makes sense, so that whatever the challenges are that are ahead. Anyway, I want to go to you, Jean-Pierre, and for us to hear from your experience. Jean-Pierre is the Secretary General of the UCLG, the United Cities and Local Governments of Africa, and he's in Morocco, and he's got lots and lots of experience. As you can see from his bio, he's been enmeshed in these issues in cities and communities in the continent of Africa for a number of years. So Jean-Pierre, thank you for joining us on City Talk and at the Massey Cities Summit, and fill us in on how you're seeing this all evolving.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Antonella. And thank to all the folks that are following this webinar. My apologies for my poor English. But
you sound good. You sound just fine.
I don't know. But what I can tell you is that this issue of governance tend to be a buzzword now. And I want to remind all of us that a few years back, the world waked up shocked by the revolt of the Tunisian people against a regime which most politicians and experts in politics around the world were describing as a stable regime servicing its people. Why did a young guy have to to burn himself out in order to attract attention on his condition as a street vendor in a secondary city of Tunisia, with no hope to earn a living because he doesn't have a certificate needed to exert his profession. I think this is what takes us to the heart of what we are talking about. We need to understand that the issue of governance for many people is a matter of life or death. But when we address these issues on platforms like this, we tend to do it in a lighter mode, somehow far from this very hard reality. Beyond the statistics, beyond the laws, beyond the maps, there are hot-blood human beings who cannot be reduced to average, or which life can be destroyed by a stroke of a pencil drawn on the urban map. So I want to call our attention on the fact that when we consider local governance, we should keep in mind this reality that for majority urban dwellers in Africa, for example, experience in real life is learned the hard way. So let's not talk of governance as if it's just a scholar issue or a theoretical issue, but it's a really, really important issue that impacts on the day-to-day living condition of the people on the ground. I'm talking from a position of Secretary General of UCLG Africa, the umbrella organization of local government on the continent. And I'm confronted with the, let's say, the dream of these elected people to get to a level where they can respond to the need of their population, but also the impediment in which they are caught, either because the competencies are not rightly defined, resources are not rightly defined, the confidence is not there, and even the perspective of the local government being the landing field of any development is not understood. So I think it is very important to not to jump into bold definition, bold discussion, but to start with this very humble way of attacking this very complex issue, defined with two words: local governance. It is very complicated. And sometimes, if you go into the case of a continent like ours, where the legitimacy of public authorities is in question, where you have different sources of legitimacy, traditional, democratic, and others. religious and others. In competition, local governance can be very complicated to define and to practice. So, well, let's start with these few remarks so that when we evolve, we are not caught into just procedural or theoretical definition or practices, what will get back to the basics all the time. Thank you for this introduction.
Thank you, Jean-Pierre. And what a poignant beginning for us to be reminded that cities are about people and the impact that these kinds of structures have on people. And as you suggested, how that manifests around the world in terms of who is advantaged and who is disadvantaged. We've certainly seen that during COVID around the world, that the people who are most vulnerable and for whom the system is not working are the ones who have been at greatest risk of the impact of actually getting COVID or the impact of the measures to close it. So to close it down. So thank you very much for reminding us just how real this is, and that it's a tangible, material conversation that we're having. So I'm going to come back to some of the things you've mentioned, as I'm sure your colleagues will. Rudi, I'm going to come to you next to talk to us a little bit about the Open Government Partnership, but your approach, you're from Argentina. You've been active, I think, in some of what Jean-Pierre and Antonella are hinting at, which is what are these instruments that allow people to have agency, some kind of input into how the structures around them affect their lives. So let's go to you and you can talk to us a bit about your perspective and your experience. Welcome.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you very much. And I'll try to complement very humbly to what Jean-Pierre has said, which is absolutely the baseline for this conversation. So the Open Government Partnership is an organization that is turning 10 years now. It was launched by President Obama and 8 leaders 10 years ago. And now it's an organization of 78 countries and more than 3,000 civil society organizations that are promoting new ways to cooperate, new ways to tackle challenges, working together with civil society, working together with non-governmental actors. And in 2016, we launched a pilot with local governments. It was the first time that local governments were part of the initiative. And what we saw in the evidence is that, of course, many of the commitments, what we promote in OGP is basically the creation of action plans and concrete commitments that are co-created with civil society and the government together and can be monitored and promoting transparency, accountability, and citizen participation in a diverse range of policies. And we have seen at the local level is that these results are better, of course, because you have the problems right and the opportunities right at your doorstep, right? The unity, the citizen unity at the national level is sort of a very impossible concept, but at the local level it becomes absolutely real. That diversity, those ecosystems that operate at the local level are very tangible. So that knowledge, that wisdom, and that capacity there at the local level makes much more sense. Before joining this organization, I worked at the national and local government in Argentina, always in a mix of citizen participation, digitalization, and public innovation. And one of the things I think is very important to think, and the pandemic has been an absolute, I would say, a turning point. What are the capacities that the local level has for innovating in the creation of policies and tackling solutions? And that's what we promote from OGP. We promote concrete tools that can help, in this case, local governments to learn how to work with other stakeholders. Usually those capacities are not part, for example, of the training or the capacity building, not at the national level and not at the local level. So when the organization that I'm working now was launched, was with the idea that we can find new ways to tackle problems. and that you cannot have all the solutions yourself being the government. You need to, and that's something that you need to train. That's something that it's really hard to do in order to work with others. Politicals get in the middle, the structure get in the middle. And I think also there is one thing in line to what Jean-Pierre and Antonella was saying, that it's also we are trying to promote a constructive dialogue between the national governments and the local governments to see what are the things that we need from you and what are the things that we can manage ourselves. Because I think that knowledge and that dialogue is also very constructive in this dialogue. But it's true that we have seen through this pandemic how municipalities have to tackle with data like probably they have never done before. Let's say permits, availability of beds, buying resources, making different kind of decisions, and they have to sort of create and make those solutions themselves in many cases, and are the ones that are being used. If you see the examples of COVID fighting around the world, many local governments, either it's a province or it's a municipality, are the ones that are showing different sort of responses and solutions that were brought through the emergency. But what happens if we train and we create better capacities at the local level in order to have more tools to promote those capacities? Because one thing is to have the capacity to react to something that as we are experiencing right now. But what's the capacity of the government to work better with others? And I think that's where really huge opportunities for innovations are appearing. And that's what we're trying to support from the Open Government Partnership. It's a new way to work better with others, which is clear that in this pandemic, we have not been able to work better with others. Because explain me how today there are countries that didn't get one vaccine. And that's cooperation doing wrong with all the organizations that I have around the world. So it's a matter of capacity. It's a matter of reimagining cooperation in a different way. And that's what we're trying to do. And in OGP, and what I'm doing right now, we are running our new local program that has expanded from 16 to 70 new local governments that are part of this experience, reformers from government and civil society that work together. So we are learning along the way, and happy to share and be part of these conversations to really rethink how we cooperate better to tackle today's the pandemic. But I think we are all aware of the challenges we have just in front of us, waiting for us.
Thank you, Rudi. I was in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina for the 5 or 6 years after that. And, we'd had this sudden flood. As we started to look at the challenges in New Orleans, we realized that there were all sorts of slow Katrinas that had existed in different forms in cities everywhere. And I feel, as you just suggested, that COVID is the most glaring global disaster, but we have so many other challenges that each of you is dealing with in your cities that maybe haven't been as visible or as visceral as COVID, but now here we are. And as this word you've used, capacity, to invest in local capacity. So I wanted to suggest to you as a group that I'm struck by a couple of key concepts that you touched on. And I'm interested whether you think local government can address these in a unique way. The first is legitimacy. Do you feel that local governments have the potential to have more legitimacy particularly in the world we're living in now? More legitimacy, first question. Secondly, the other half of it, which Antonella talked about, accountability. And Jean-Pierre, you mentioned it as well. Is it possible that citizens and residents, voters, will support more power to local municipalities because they feel they're legitimate and they're accountable. And then my word, the third was, could we make the case they're more effective in addressing, if empowered, could they be more effective in meeting our needs? And then what you're suggesting, Rudi, is then we need to invest in their capacity. So I'm wondering if I might come back to you, Jean-Pierre, because you raised the issue of legitimacy, and we are experiencing that in North America and Europe as well, around vaccine hesitancy, for instance. Where is the legitimacy coming from? What is your perspective about the potential for local governments to actually be able to earn the level of legitimacy that is required for them to do their job? What do you think?
Well, first of all, let's say that the first experience of any citizen to the public authority, except the migrants or refugees, is the local authority. This is very clear that the local authority is the closest public authority to the people. So it means that these citizens are very much inclined to judge the legitimacy of public authority through the length of the way local authorities serve them. And this is why we don't understand when a central government is reluctant to decentralize or devolve power to local authorities, because its own legitimacy is judged by the way the citizen appreciate their local authorities. So the aim of any governance is to build trust between the citizen and the public authorities. And this, the first step to building this trust is to have, for people that have confidence in their local authorities. So your question go far more beyond this first statement. You talk of more legitimacy. In the case of Africa, we have a problem, a serious one. Is that most of the government or national state derive from the legacy of colonization. And these states, the borders of this state, were defined in the Tea Party in 1885 in Berlin. So we start building our state from the roof, not from the foundations. And this is why we say that decentralization offers the opportunity to renegotiate the legitimacy of these states and embed them in societies. But when encountering these societies, we had over legitimacies in there, the traditional legitimacy. That is contradictory sometimes with the legitimacy of the modern state. So the way we are going to make hybridation of these two legitimacy is the issue. And I don't know if the local level is not the appropriate level to try and make this hybridation between the traditional legitimacy and the modern state legitimacy. For sure, it cannot be done at the national level. So if we have any chance for it to be done, is at the local level. And this is why we think that the local level is more legitimate to renegotiate and to rebuild the confidence to public authorities than the national level. But we are living in the world of states. Mm-hmm. And the legitimacy of all our states is related to international relations, not the relation with their citizens. So you see where we are caught into a contradiction here.
Yeah. I mean, you're describing a kind of ground up democracy.
Yes.
From the ground up. And my connection to your comment about people's experience of government is shaped by their experience of their local government. We see that in Canada, and we have colleagues participating over the next few days who've been advocates for this. When a newcomer comes to Canada, emigrates to Canada, and they're here for a period of time, and then they're eligible for citizenship, and they take their oath of citizenship, we know that their understanding of Canada is actually about their understanding of the city that they're in. Yeah. That's Canada to them, just as you suggested. And the question, as you're questioning, though, somewhere over time, we've drifted to a place where nation states are structured to set these policies and directions that are become so far away from people. So, yes. Antonella, if we go to you in terms of the accountability piece, we certainly argue here that, as Jean-Pierre's suggesting, that at the local level, there has tended to be less partisanship, and the focus tends to be on letting those local officials solve problems. Can we persuade the public, and someone in the chat's pointing this out, that people don't tend to go and vote in their municipal elections in North America? They're very low turnout. But yet Jean-Pierre is saying that's the most important level of government in front of them. Can we persuade people that you can have a higher degree of accountability of local? What's your experience in Europe on that, Antonella?
Yeah, I'm trying to follow the conversation here and also reading all the very interesting.
I know.
Chats. So
there's a lot in the chat. Yeah, I know.
Anyway, just one thing is that before I respond, before responding to your point on accountability, I think the point that Jean-Pierre made on tradition is actually very important. I mean, we are coming from a sort of strong social and institutional setting from the past. And that has an immense influence, the way we address public local institutions. So if we talk about Europe, I mean, the small net close, Western Europe, let's say, so it's usually very city-based oriented. So it's Le Maire en France, it's the cities in Italy. We essentially are very urbanized and cities we have been like this for many centuries. If we talk about Eastern European, for instance, where I have been working in a transition after the end of the war and the transition post-Soviet, for them, municipalities are they consider it a very low level of governance. Because when it is very centralized top-down, and especially in former communist area, the center of the power was not the municipality, it was the party. It was the Secretary General of the party, and coming from Moscow, let's say so, yeah? So they don't see the municipality as a place to decide, because everything is decided elsewhere.
Because it was so centralized.
Yes, but even though today things have changed substantially, I'm not really talking about Russia per se, but the rest, for instance, of Eastern Europe have changed. But in the mindset of the people, it's an enormous struggle to perceive what are the laws actually. So this is, the world and these kind of places are full of very good laws on decentralization, for instance, yes, empowerment of local municipalities, of regions, but not implemented because the people don't feel it. So this is what I wanted to say. Accountability needs to be you need to build it through instruments and also through awareness of citizens that understand that and perceive that this is an important level of governance. Said that, people are not stupid, you know, and they are not passive. Yeah, people are not stupid and they are not passive. They are reacting to things which are important. So if nothing important happens there, so they are not asking for accountability. So we need to decentralize decisions, powers, and competences so that the people feel that this is an important level. So if the municipality does not decide anything, they don't have budget. For instance, we have been working in countries where the municipalities were created to do this famous phantomatic decentralization. Sorry, I do these kind of things because probably I'm from the South, so I use a lot of my hands. So it's, you know, you need to put things, important decision in the municipalities and the cities. Otherwise, the people will not ask for accountability.
Right. So you know, we tend to say chicken, egg. It's one of
yes,
those things.
Yes. Well,
both, right?
There is no chicken, no egg. It goes together. Yeah. And then I think that, of course, Mary, it's more accountable. Just for the very, very basic reason is that local governments, you know, they have a name, a face, and they are living here. So you know, you can knock at the door, and the children of these people are in the same school where my children are going. So there is a very direct accountability, and you cannot really fool too much around because it's actually very clear. So there is a potential of accountability which is immense at the local level. For instance, I have been working in a small country for research where ALDA has also activities in Eastern Europe, which is Moldova, which is a small country which used to be USSR. And there, a small municipality, they have a staff. I remember that I did a research on what Jean-Pierre mentioned. So we should, you know, look at the laws and at the practice on citizens' participation and local governance. So I went there to see both the law and the practices. And there was the lady dealing with taxes in the municipalities. We are talking about 12,000 people. Huh? And they had a staff member going in the street, explaining in the street what the taxes were for. So there were meeting the citizens, explaining to the citizens in the street, in the main street of this little town, which is actually called Comrades, because it's not abstract. As we all said, it's reality. You have cities with names and people living there. So in Comrades, Moldova, capital of Gagauzia, which is a separated sort of in autonomous state of Moldova, a region of Moldova, there is a person going in the street and explaining to citizens why they are paying taxes. What is that for? So, of course, communication, explaining why they are paying taxes and how they can be used for the community, it's very important. Yes, there is an immense potential of accountability, but as I said, we need to start from the point that the people understand what is good and what is wrong, and they understand where the power is. If they understand the power is not there, that they are just, you know, puppets, then they will not ask for anything. So I think
yeah, I mean, you're making this point, I think, that local government could earn legitimacy if in fact it had, if it had clear responsibility and it had resources, it would eventually earn legitimacy and it would become accountable. It's interesting, Jean-Pierre's comment, and I reinforced it with my anecdote about citizenship, has caused the chat to blow up here about who is our allegiance to in Canada. But I think, Jean-Pierre, you raised a fundamental point around the legacy of colonialism And as Antonella said, the legacy of Eastern Europe under Soviet times, these are traditional kinds of structures that affect people's capacity. And what I think Jean-Pierre is challenging us to do is actually, can we go back to the basic unit and rebuild our democracy from the local level? So I'm interested. Go ahead. Do you want to chime in on that, Antonella? And then I'll come to you, Rudi. Go ahead, Antonella.
Yeah, sorry. I know that I have to give the floor to Rudi, who has a great experience. I just wanted to say a couple of things that maybe is of interest of our participants, is that more and more I'm working in countries where the national level is so stuck, so stuck in anything, corrupted, entangled in coup one after another, in war, that the only approach which is possible in any kind of governance is through the local level, and very much also through a combination of new and old. And I'm talking about Libya. I've been working in Libya, which is a non-state. It's a non-state. It's not really a state as we define it. But for many years now, they pretend to have found a solution. I hope for them that this is the good one. But the local governance has been elected, Jean-Pierre. They had local election in Libya, while the national level, you can forget about it. So it's interesting to see that in many countries, and this is not only the case, Libya, that the national level, it's, as we say in French, ça brasse du noir. It means that it's dark, and you move into the darkness.
It's muddy, yeah.
Yeah, it's muddy,
It's so, and I mean, I want to go down to Rudi just to have him comment a bit about these tools, transparency, openness. Is this part of how we respond to Jean-Pierre's challenge, that we go back to the local and build from the ground up? Is that part of what you're enabling, this to make local government more effective and therefore have the legitimacy that Antonella says that it can earn? Is that, are you seeing that in the partnerships you're forming?
Yeah, and what I really like about what Jean-Pierre said is this idea of architecture, right? And building the basic, because what we really need to ask is how we go beyond the ballot box when you're trying to talk about creating, because we currently have a challenge of trust, right? In our institutions that have done a lot of work to not gain that trust. And I'm talking about the state in general. You can take a look in the parliament, you can take a look in justice and the executive power. All the state I would say have failed in terms of creating that connection. And I think a more informed citizenship, it's a challenge that we all are living with. Because the government has become this sort of black box, which is very complex, right? The jargon, the language, the bad bureaucracy, because there is good bureaucracy. It has become something really hard to understand. But at the local level, the opportunities are much higher. Antonella was saying very clearly, and Jean-Pierre as well, you have entry points on that distance and the matters that you tackle that opens a lot of opportunities for that, for building those mechanisms. And what we have seen in the Open Government Partnership all around the world, at the national, but at the local level with more results, is that there are so many tools to involve citizens on understanding, as Antonella was saying, what are the taxes are for? How are decisions being made? How is this money being spent? What if we don't understand, how can we make questions? How you create a more informed citizenship that can care about more of the problems? Because the government is not going to solve it themselves. It's that you have to change the way. And what we have seen in OGP and what we promote is this construction of different initiatives that are built with the government and civil society together that promote more accessible information, promote tools to take decisions together, to understand and visualize better how the government is spending, not only for transparency, because making smarter decisions. There is now all this narrative on the smart cities, which I really, really hate, because you are smart as how you work with your citizens, right?
Yeah.
It's like the flavor of the month. And as Pierre was saying, let's not jump into the flavor of the month narrative when what we need to do is making sure that we build solid bases on that architecture that we need to build, where citizens are put at the center, but we also try to find a way to create that, to bring citizens in. Because there is that distance in which the politics and the government are usually the ones taking the decisions, and citizens are left outside. So there is a crisis of
legitimacy. But I was even going to go a little further and ask you whether this is about trust. You know, can citizens or residents, realizing we have people living in cities who aren't national citizens, can residents trust local government, and can they trust that their human rights, for instance, will be protected at the local level? Jean-Pierre, do you want to comment on that in terms of what your experience has been around that? How do you reassure citizens that their local government will in fact be the one that serves them and protects them?
You know, this issue of power, because this is a question of power and the sharing of power among the ones that are said to be elected, and that think that the election means that they are delegated powers, and they will then look for 5 years or 4 years before they go back again to ask for this delegation. And you see, the system of representation and the elective democracy, someone said that less and less people vote. So what is the representativeness of these elected authorities that are elected by less and less people? This is why we think it is important here also to bridge representative democracy with participatory democracy. And this participatory democracy means that, yes, you have times when you elect your people that can talk politically for you, but during the mandate, you have the opportunity to participate in the debates and the living the policy, defining the policy of your local government, because there are participatory systems in place. And like Antonella said it, you need instrument for that. You can not just say accountability. You need instrument for accountability, confidence, but you need instrument for confidence. So there are instruments to slowly build the participation of citizens in the governance of the city. Well, I can mention one of the instruments that is now known is the participatory budgeting processes, born in Brazil, that is spread out in Africa. We have more than 1,500 local government that practice now the participatory budgeting. But there are others instruments. We have what we call citizen rating that compare how the citizens judge the way they are being governed. And we ourselves at UCLG Africa, we went further to say that we are going to rate the way national government are friendly or not to local government. And we create what we call the CEE rating, City Enabling Environment Rating. That rate the countries of Africa pertaining to 12 indicators. And we classify these countries into green countries that are friendly to local government, yellow countries that could be friendly but that require some adjustment, orange countries that are to become friendly should need serious reforms, and red countries that are adverse to local government. Because you need an enabling environment.
Is it working, Jean-Pierre?
It is.
The countries that got red,
Yes.
you know, are the locals voting the bums out? Like
they are challenged by their own local government. They say, oh, we are red in all of Africa. We are behind all the others. Why can't you be with the 5 green? So there is sort of competition. And remember, we organize every 3 years on this continent, and we are the only continent that does that. What we call Afri-Cities, a summit where we bring the bulk of local government of Africa to discuss the implementation of decentralization policies and the role of local and regional government in the development integration of the continent. And this CA rating form part of the discussion that is held between the mayors and leaders of regional local governments, the ministers, the development partners, and now we will be adding the regional economic communities in the setting of the African Union. So it is very critical that this issue of accountability is not treated as a standalone. It is part of the all-enabling environment for building trust between the people and the public institution, and building the relation between local authorities and the other stakeholders that are active at the local level.
I feel like you three are just doing it. We have this phrase that we use here about better to ask for forgiveness than permission. I don't know whether you're familiar with that phrase, but I feel like you three just say, look, we're just going to do it. We're going to tangibly demonstrate these things and then earn our way. We've only got a few more minutes left, so I'm just going to ask each of you just to give us 30 seconds, a minute on what you think the priority is for you right now in terms of strengthening local governance in the purview that you've got. First to you, Antonella, then back to you, Jean-Pierre, and then Rudi, you to clean up. Go ahead, on to Antonella, you first.
Priorities. It's hard to say from where to start. Well,
can you pick one?
Yeah. So some are more strategic, Mary, and some are more basic. Let's say so. So of course we want to even more. I mean, ALDA, my association, is working on practices of building communities and citizens' participation. So we want to really test and work to empower this dialogue. So we do a lot of practices, and we try to understand what works well and what not. So to provide a lot to our members and to the communities we work for, the instrument.
So let's just take that. I'm going to try to tie it up in a bow.
And then you have the day-to-day. So we are called every day by a lot of people who need help in these communities, and that's also connected to this situation.
Sure.
But let's take this one. Yes.
This idea of creating instruments that are going to demonstrate this new architecture that you guys are talking about. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Jean-Pierre, one priority.
Well, I think it is important for Africa, for example, to say that decentralization policies have opened the door to more complex system of local governance.
Yeah.
Because local people can mobilize either modern state local authorities or customary traditional powers. So this complexity is one of the difficult situations where we are facing. because most of the time the state is too young to have gotten a footprint recognized by everybody as a reference in the management of its day-to-day activities and the search for security. In such situation, the involvement of traditional authorities in the governance become a requirement if the concern is to reconcile the unity of the nation with the diversity of community living inside the boundary of the national territory. So we think it is important to get into this reflection and to try and have a sort of inescapable influence of on many activities by traditional authorities. The Africa section that of UCLD.
I think you've introduced the notion of positive complicity, maybe.
Exactly.
Maybe there's a way to dismantle. Okay, last word to you very briefly, Rudi, just 30 seconds priority.
Yeah, I think local governance is important. Open local governance is key. And what we do in OGP is basically develop tools for creating those connections and those relations. More than 4,000 commitments have been built in the context of this global infrastructure for the past 10 years, promoting these tools for accountability, transparency, and citizen trust. So openness is the key.
Fabulous. So much to think about: legitimacy, accountability, effectiveness, trust, capacity, instruments of sharing and trustworthiness, all the stuff that you raised. Thank you so much, Antonella, Jean-Pierre, and Rudi. What a really rich conversation. A lot of the things that you touched on and that the people in the chat have touched on are going to be dealt with in the next session, which is on cities and Indigenous relationships, with Chief Laforme and a number of panelists talking about the colonial history in Canada and what the constitutional constraints would be on that and how that needs to evolve. So thank you for, that's at 3 o'clock Eastern for people that are wondering. Just go to the website, you'll find it. Thanks for joining us. Really, Antonella, Jean-Pierre, and Rudi, you've enriched our conversation tremendously. And it makes us feel better that we're kind of all in this and that cities everywhere are struggling with these issues and challenges. And as we recreate and go back to Jean-Pierre, build from the bottom, build back from the ground up. So happy to have you with us. Thanks for joining us. And thanks everybody for tuning in.
Thank you.
Great to see you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.